Jesteśmy na seminarium w Krakowie, które poprowadził Dean Lister. Dean, nice to meet you. First of all, you had a successful career. You fought at Pride, you fought at UFC. Can you tell me, because you stopped fighting for 3 years, what was the reason?
Well, there's many things to it, but basically, you know, I started doing jiu-jitsu when I was 19. I'm a little bit older now, of course, but you know, eventually, when things stopped being fun, you know, when I got into it, it was fun. It was something I liked to do. It was hard, but I liked doing it. And then after being in, you know, feeling like not abused by the sport, but let's say doing the sport where it's not being beneficial to me, I'm not enjoying it, I had to just take a step back before I quit. I wasn't going to quit, but before it was something that was going to injure me or something like that. So I had to take time off and just kind of recharge the batteries. Now I'm back. I feel good now.
And when you had your 5 minutes at the UFC, you were 4-2, 4 wins, 2 losses, and it wasn't even the losing streak. Why did you quit, or why did they resign of your services?
It was very, very bad advice from my manager at the time. Very bad advice. He had told me that the UFC wanted me to come back with fresh batteries, just like I said, but turns out they were not going to fire me. And he said, "Oh, you know, I should be respectful and come back later," which was really bad advice. And I found out later that he was trying to open his own fight league. So I think he was trying to make me be one of his first fighters in his fight league. It's just ridiculous, but that's what happened. And so, of course, I didn't want to leave the UFC. After I left the UFC, I realized it was, you know, not good, but I would use it to the best opportunity and just recharge my batteries, like I said. But yeah, it was really bad advice. So they were not. I heard they were not going to fire me. I had my last fight against Okami was boring. It was bad. Most fights that are bad are boring. Everyone has 1 or 2, and I've had like 2 in the UFC. I have 4 victories. So it's you know, I had a winning record. I found out they were not going to cut me. So it was just one of those things. It's just ironic, but bad advice, and also my mistake for listening. You know.
And you have a pretty cool comeback this year. Any plans for the nearest future while fighting?
Yeah, definitely. I like fighting internationally. Hopefully, I get to come here and fight in Poland. I want to talk to a few people out here about that. You know, UFC is still an open door for me. They have not closed the door on me, so anything's possible. But I really do appreciate traveling. I'm going to see new places, meet new people, and see new things. So hopefully, you'll be seeing me around here more in Poland with my boy Thomas and stuff like that. So.
And we're here right after the seminar. Why did you decide to show those specific techniques?
Well, it's because I was asked more of those questions. Whenever I do seminars, I don't come with these 20 moves I'm going to show. I always show something different to different people. And so if I was to be in the Midwest USA, for instance, they have a lot of good wrestlers out there. I'm not going to spend too much time showing takedowns. I'm going to show submissions. If I go to a place that doesn't have good takedowns, I'm going to show good takedowns. It's usually wherever you go is individually different. And here, a lot of people were liking the leg locks a lot. And matter of fact, all the guys I faced in international competition from Poland, they like to go for footlocks a lot. So that's like a regional thing. Interesting. And I also like the footlocks, so it was a good day.
Were you surprised of the skills you saw here in Poland?
Yes, absolutely. I was saying earlier that, you know, I've been all around Europe. I think I've been to 20 European countries, and I've seen, you know, MMA is getting more popular in Sweden and UK and Ireland and in Germany, but I think it's growing really fast. The fastest here, and the skill is really high. In 2005, I won the European Championship in Germany. And I think half of the competitors were from Poland, or something like that. Like half of the competitors, and their team won that tournament. And I was, you know, I didn't know that, but that's the first time I saw how popular the sport is growing. And of course, now I know it's true because I'm here right now. So it's good.
And you had your success at the last ADCC competition. Can you explain me what is the main difference when you prepare yourself for grappling tournaments or for MMA?
For me, it's mentally much easier than MMA, because MMA, you have a much higher chance of getting hurt. It's not as relaxed, but I really approach the training basically the same. Matter of fact, I keep doing my striking up until maybe 2 weeks before ADCC. I stopped doing that. I make the rounds longer, maybe make 20-minute rounds. It's more important to, you know, have the 20-minute conditional, you know, 20-minute conditions. Just go for 20 minutes or 40 minutes, you know. And matter of fact, do that several times in the day, because in the match you're going to have 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 3 matches in the same day. Versus MMA, you're going to have 1 fight only, unless you're in some crazy tournament. But usually that's what happens. You could train for one fight for 5 minutes or for 3 5-minute rounds. In ADCC, you have to be ready to go for, you know, a 20-minute match and a second 20-minute match and a third 20. It's going to be very taxing in a longer period on your body than MMA. But MMA is more, it's more of a mental challenge, you know, because it's so many skill sets that you need. Striking, you need grappling, you need takedowns. It's more of a skill set and a different kind of conditioning. So that's how I make it different. I just make the rounds longer, and I train more often in the day too.
And today we can observe there's much more pressure for striking and wrestling, and grappling is not so important anymore. Why do you think is the reason?
Grappling is not. One more time. What was it?
I mean, there's more pressure for striking and for wrestling at MMA, and jiu-jitsu, it seems like it's not so important anymore. They don't want to go to the ground. And why do you think is the reason?
Well, I think because jiu-jitsu is so effective, everyone's learning it, and now it's becoming to where people, you know, even someone who says they don't train jiu-jitsu and they do MMA, and if they have a successful record, of course they do. You know, even though they don't realize it, you know, the things that they're doing to not be on the ground, well, might be more based on wrestling, but the things they do to get off the ground, to avoid the neck, to getting choked and stuff like that, is jiu-jitsu defense. It is jiu-jitsu. So that's almost like someone saying, you know, learning how to block kicks, and they say kicking isn't effective. It is effective. You just have to find someone at a higher level who can do it to you. So every aspect of combat is effective in mixed martial arts. That's why it's called mixed martial arts. It's mixed with different arts. I just think, like, you see different phases. You see, in the old days, it was jiu-jitsu was the phase, and then it became the wrestlers were taking, and then it went to actually the kickboxers. You had Maurice Smith was knocking people out in the head. No one was doing that before. And then after that, the jiu-jitsu guys started coming back, and then the rest of it just goes like this forever. And it's like saying boxing. I see boxing. Oh, you know, the guys with long arms are better. And then you see Mike Tyson come in with short arms and knock everyone out. Oh, guys with short arms are better. Then you see someone else, long arms like Klitschko, come in, and you know, it's just different styles. You have to, if you have your own style and you can use it, that's the key. You know, I don't have to be anyone else's style. If someone else's style can beat me, that's just that day, that particular time. So I'm not concerned about jiu-jitsu not being important. It's very important, but I do understand that the rules right now with the stand-ups and with the 5-minute rounds give the guy more chances to use the stand-up and use the wrestling defense. Once I get someone to the ground, they don't get up usually. You know, they don't get off the ground. That's just my experience. So when someone's fighting me, they got to feel like if they make one mistake and they fall, you know, it's like they're on a balance beam, you know. I better not fall, you know. I better not fall. That's always in the back of their mind. If they make one mistake on the ground with me, it's going to cost them. So that's in the back of their mind, makes their striking less effective. That's why people stay away from me. They don't step in and try to knock me out usually. They stay away, and it's hard to take them down. It usually makes for a very boring fight though. So that's why I'm working my striking. So I do agree, striking is very important, of course.
And it's not the first time you help out Tomasz Drwal. You came here to help him out. How did you guys meet? Can you remember this?
Met a long time ago in my gym, Victory MMA in San Diego. It's a great place to train. He came in with two I think at the time they were his managers, two older folks from Poland. Came in, and Thomas came in initially, was, you know, I think he was a little just kind of to himself. You know, he didn't know anyone in San Diego. He was already in the UFC, and he was looking for some good training. So we started training, and he was, you know, became real good friends soon after. You know, I was in the corner, his corner, when he fought Drew McFedries in UFC. He was living just a few blocks from my house, and we were training every day, twice a day. And so, you know, he's hit me as hard as he can. I've hit him as hard as I can. You know, he's gotten me in crazy positions on the ground. I got him crazy. We've shared all kinds of knowledge, and we are real good friends now. So. And
how long will you stay here in Poland? And is there any maybe secret fight for Tomasz, and maybe you will help him with to prepare or something?
It'd be my honor to help him with anything that he needs in the future. I don't know of any secret fight, but if there is, you know, I'll ask him. We'll see. As far as Poland, I'm here tonight in Krakow. They're going to show me, I think, some Polish culture tonight or something. We're going to go out and see something, do something. Tomorrow I go to Sweden for 2 days. I come back, I go to Warsaw. So I'll be in Warsaw for 2 days, and then I'm off to Russia.
And the last question, we're one day before the UFC 146, the main event, Junior Dos Santos and Frank Mir. What is your prediction?
I know both guys. I'll tell you what, you never know about the fight. I just think that Dos Santos is too strong, hits too hard. And, you know, if you look at his fight with Roy Nelson, it's not like, you know, he's easy to take down, you know, and if you do take him down, he can get back up. He hits so hard. I mean, I just think that I don't see it anyway. Well, Mir's very talented, but I just think that Dos Santos can be too strong for him. That's my opinion. I don't usually give him, but there you go.
And the co-main event, the Cain Velasquez and Antonio Bigfoot Silva.
Ooh, I think Cain Velasquez. I think he's too fast. He hits too hard. Bigfoot Silva is very resilient and very tough. But I think Cain Velasquez is too good of a wrestler, and he has his boxing is too fast, too good. He hits so hard also. So I think it's going to be Cain, and I think Dos Santos. Those are the two victors, I believe.
Thank you. I wish you much luck and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.